Good afternoon. I think we've got people coming in now. Fabulous, wonderful, thank you. We're just going to let a few more people come in. Russell, we will just change your settings because I think you've come in on the members rather than the presenters link. Can you just see if you can unmute, Russell, just so we can hear you?
Yeah, I can. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Perfect. We've got you. That's the main thing. Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. There will be a few people kind of joining, but it shouldn't beep too much. Good afternoon. My name is Richard Ayres and I'm a social care advisor here at Care England. And I'd like to welcome you today to our joint employee ownership and Sure Healthcare Care England webinar. It's a bit of a mouthful, titled People Powered Care, which is going to ask why should care providers consider employee ownership as an option. Hopefully you will have seen the joint white paper that we produced regarding employee ownership, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat to you all shortly so you can have a look at that. This was developed, the paper was developed after the Care England Sector Pulse survey that was conducted at the back end of last year, which revealed for a third year on the trot that around a third of care providers in the adult social care sector are considering exiting the market over the next few years. This is kind of reinforced by the introduction of cost pressures such as inflation, energy costs, which are at an all-time high, and the recent rise in the national insurance contributions, putting more pressure on care providers. So to help with one of the solutions for sort of market exit and market restructuring, we are delighted to be joined by two sector specialists. Firstly, Chief Executive of the Employee Ownership Association, James Dillavine, and who will be outlining employee ownership for business owners, employees, and the care sector as a whole. And Russell Brown, the CEO of Sure Healthcare, who will also explain the benefits to the employees of employee ownership and the impact on the balance sheet and for the quality of care. James and then Russell will talk for around 20 to 25 minutes, during which you are free to use the chat to raise any questions that you would like to raise. After which we will open the floor to a question answer, at which point you are free to raise your hand. I'll also drop my email address into the chat should you wish to ask any questions privately. You can email me then and ask those on your behalf. So when we start the session, again, please use the chat to raise any questions. We'll try and address those throughout the presentation or after in the Q&A. The session is recording and we will share a copy of the slides, the recording and any FAQ afterwards. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to James, who will introduce himself. Sonam, please share the slides and we will bring you all back for the Q&A session shortly. Please have your sound turned on because we will have a short video we'll be running halfway through the presentation. Thank you. Over to you, James.
Brilliant, Richard. Thanks so much and welcome everybody. Thanks for giving up a bit of your time on a Tuesday afternoon, and particularly Russell, it's lovely to see you again. I'm going to try and talk for a few minutes to help demystify what employee ownership is. I'm also going to refer back to some old language when I say next slide, please. So Sonam, if you could run through the slide deck for me, that'd be great. So that's who's speaking today. So I'm going to talk about employee ownership in the care sector, and then you've got Russell Brown, who's going to talk about your experiences, Russell, aren't you? That's right, as leading the UK's largest employee-owned and an award-winning employee-owned business. Next slide, please. So we really welcome the invitation from Care England to collaborate on a white paper. We see the opportunity for employee-owned businesses across the UK economy, but we know when there are particular opportunities in particular sectors, and that in some sectors employee ownership can have a really transformational impact. It really is a model, a business model. So this is an ownership and business operations model that's suited to labour-intensive workforces, where people are the organisation. People are powering these businesses, and care is absolutely one of those. And we're going to hear from the brilliant story of Sure Healthcare in a bit. So thanks for the opportunity to produce the paper. There's a lot of substance in there, and I'm going to try and tease out some of the headlines from that now, and try to really give you a flavour of employee ownership across the UK and why we see the relevance for this particular sector. But just on a personal level, my mum was a matron in several nursing homes growing up, and I remember as a kid spending Christmases and and after school sessions in homes, and they're really important to me. And I am personally committed to seeing really great solutions introduced into the sector, because I have fear they're being hollowed out. And I'm by no means an expert. You all will be, and we're going to hear from Russell soon. But this isn't a pitch. This isn't a sales pitch for employee ownership, so that we as an association can grow the sector. This is more absolutely employee ownership can deliver a really meaningful change within sectors, and I think there's a real opportunity for us here. So if you go to the next slide, please. My name's James. We can skip past that. It's always embarrassing to see your own photo on the slide for a while, but I've been Chief Executive of the Employee Ownership Association for the last 3 years. We are the network of employee-owned businesses across the UK, and that number is growing rapidly. There are currently over 2,300 employee-owned businesses in the UK, covering all parts of the geography, but also all parts of our economy. So we see businesses from household names, some of which you'll be familiar with, so the John Lewis, to Howden Insurance Group, to richer sounds, and perhaps some of the larger consulting firms like Mott MacDonald and Arup. But really, the majority of employee-owned businesses exist within the SME market. And while Shaw is a great example of a large business, and you're going to hear from Russell talking about that, the majority of employee ownership in the UK is concentrated across the SME sector. We see concentrations both in regions, but also in sectors. So there is a significant density in the southeast, but also up in the northwest. I'm calling from Manchester today, and hot in our heels is Leeds. But there's also some fantastic work taking place across Wales, across Scotland, and more recently also new initiatives in Northern Ireland to grow employee ownership. As I said at the start of the call, employee ownership really is well suited to labour-intensive workforces, but it's really a relatively new phenomenon. So while John Lewis might be over 100 years old, the current model of employee ownership, the most predominant model of employee ownership in the UK, utilises something called an employee ownership trust. And the trust law associated with employee ownership was updated in 2014. And since then, we've seen a rapid growth from around 150 businesses to over 2,300. And there's a whole host of reasons that are driving that growth that are making employee ownership very relevant for this moment in time. So if we go to the next slide, please, I'm just going to talk through some of those impacts and some of the things that we see. So why are people choosing employee ownership? Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that there is a generational wealth transfer taking place across the UK, in fact, across a lot of developed nations. And what that means is that there are typically baby boomer business founders transferring or considering the exit of their businesses and transferring those businesses to new ownership. And there are a number of routes that you can choose when looking to get rid of your business. You could choose to sell it to private equity, which I know is something that's taking place in the care sector. You could look at other forms of trade sales. You could look at potentially management buyouts. But more and more people are thinking actually the transfer to employees is a really great opportunity for them. As an exiting founder, I don't know how many of you are founders on the call, but if you're an exiting founder, a sale to employee ownership probably gives you greater control over the pace and direction of that sale. And maybe, Russell, that might be something you can speak to in your experience. But it's also a mechanism. Employee ownership is a great mechanism to root businesses locally and to protect the legacy that's been built up in those businesses. So if you're very proud as an exiting founder of what you've built and you want to support and reward those that have supported that growth, employee ownership is a fantastic and really elegant solution to transferring ownership to employees. So we've got, on one hand, we've got this generation of business owners looking to exit over the next 5 to 10 years. And we've got a generation of business owners that probably want to recognise and protect what they've built. And employee ownership is, as I say, that really elegant solution that sits in the middle of that Venn diagram. Next slide, please. So what happens when you transfer to employee ownership? Well, the first thing to say on that is it's not a silver bullet. So employee ownership is hard works, but when you do work at it, And when leaders invest strategically in their employee ownership and leverage the model to its best effects, you do get some fantastic outcomes inside the business. And we see that across our membership and across the network. And we've undertaken significant research on this that found that employee-owned businesses, because of their ownership structures, can improve the financial well-being of employees in the business. So our members and employee-owned businesses will typically pay higher wages. And there's actually a fantastic tax efficient way to distribute profits to your new employee owners. Every employee owner in the UK is currently eligible for a £3,600 tax-free profit distribution each year. And the average profit distribution is around £2,800 across most employee-owned businesses. We see our membership and employee-owned businesses having greater focus on employee well-being. Well, if you're all co-owners of your business, it's perhaps not a surprise that fantastic suggestions are coming through from all parts of the business up into the leadership to make recommendations about how we can improve our operations, our packages, etc., that support employees. And so that means that employees tend to be more satisfied. And if you've got more satisfied employees, you've got people working harder, performing better, contributing more effectively, and ultimately supporting business growth long term. We also spot that employee-owned businesses, and I think this is particularly probably pertinent to the care sector, is the investment in training and skills. So we see that employee-owned businesses outperform their peers by how much they spend on training and development. Again, rooted in the ideas of ownership, is actually our people are our greatest asset, and if we continue to invest in them, the business will continue to flourish as a result. So there's a whole wealth of research that we've undertaken, and great evidence, but also great stories of how employees, as a result of becoming co-owners, partners, there's a whole bunch of different names that people utilize for their model, but how that connects them closely to the business, and as a result, the businesses thrive. So I'm just going to ask Sanam to move to the next slide, because as well as employee ownership being fantastic for an exiting founder, as well as being really great for employee owners once they've become employee owned, it's also brilliant for the business. So we see profits grow after transition. So you might already be a profitable, highly successful business, but when you unlock that potential of your ownership, and employee owners start acting and behaving like owners, you'll start to see productivity gains. So on average, we see around 8 to 12% more productive than non-employee owned businesses. We see commercial success. So we see some of our businesses really leaning into the fact that they're employee owned, and that being really meaningful in procurement practices, because they're able to demonstrate as a result of their employee ownership, they're delivering better outcomes for their people, for their local community, but also for the business as a whole. And as a result of being more productive, more commercially viable, we're seeing more and more employee-owned businesses invest in product development, service development, and actually being able to grow. And so we're seeing a lot of the employee-owned sector, despite lots of economic challenges at the moment, being very successful and scaling quite significantly. And I think there's an opportunity within the care sector, both for existing employee-owned businesses to consider EO as part of their exit route. And once they have become employee ownership, I think you become a very attractive proposition as to potentially think about how you grow and maybe acquire other businesses, etc. So being employee owned requires hard work. It requires some really careful considerations in terms of your day-to-day operations. But when things are firing and things are working well, and this is what I hope Russell's going to bring to life for us, it can be a really fantastic model. I think I've got 2 more slides. So if we move to the next one, please. So I'm really trying to tease the opportunity here at the moment, but if you are on the call and you're thinking, okay, sounds like a win-win, it's good for an exiting founder, it's good for the employees, it's good for the business. Quite often we get asked, well, what's wrong? Well, you know, what are the challenges? And maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A. But things you might need to consider in order to move from where you are to there is employee ownership is all about business, and and it needs to be a viable business. So this is not a rescue mechanism for a failing business. You wouldn't transfer a failing business to your employees. So business viability is absolutely critical. It's an incredibly flexible model too. And so the reason I've not really outlined the mechanics of employee ownership and the deal structures today is because you can flex the model to suit your business. So depending on the scale of business, where you're located, how much employee ownership you want to offer in terms of the shares, and how much as a the exiting founder you might want to retain. So there's some really important considerations around whether how you structure your deal and really around the eligibility. The business needs to be profitable. So the way that the founder receives their payment, their payout when they sell their business, this isn't a gift to your employees. This is a form of sale, is that the founder is paid out of future revenue, typically. And so funding the transition requires careful consideration, and there are opportunities for lenders to come in and be part of that transaction, but it requires specialist expertise, I'd say, to understand that right from the outset. And this is a transition, this is a leadership succession narrative. And so if you have an exiting founder, when they start to step away from your business, that leaves a significant hole. And for most founder-owned businesses, that gap can be significant and requires very careful consideration and planning for how you will fill that gap. And it's highly unlikely you'll find a like-for-like replacement. So breaking that down and understanding what that journey looks like is important both for the exiting founder, but also for the business. And then once you've made your move to employee ownership, once you've signed the paperwork and you become employee owned, you've got to bring it to life. So to get all the benefits I talked through earlier, you have to invest in it. And the EOA, we've codified areas of practice that we know that helps bring employee ownership to life, focused on areas of your governance, of how you leverage employee ownership inside the business and externally too. I think the best piece of advice I would give at anyone considering this is be really early on in the process, define what success looks like. Define what success looks like for you as a stakeholder, whether that be yourself as an exiting founder, your employees, the business, those closest to you in your supply chain, in your wider network. And everyone will have different measures of success, but if you can identify those early on, I think you've got a great chance of making it work. I've got one more slide, I believe, Senna, if you can move on. Which once you have become employee owned, there is a real opportunity to put your people first. And that's why we've called this the people powered care report. So we know that when employee ownership is working well within a business, it can have positive impacts on recruitment and retention. We actually know in certain sectors that undergrads are being taught about employee ownership because they're likely now to encounter it as they go through recruitment processes. But actually, as a retention tool, and I'm certain Russell's going to talk about this, employee ownership can be a really powerful mechanism to retain people in your business. It's a great way to consider reward and pay. So the tax efficient profit distribution is a great way to top up base pay. But employee ownership, if it's authentic, also creates lots of mechanisms to reward employees in all sorts of different ways. And I know Shaw do that, and I know that other employee-owned businesses in this sector do that fantastically well. In order to achieve that, it's really important that employee-owned businesses put in the mechanisms inside the business to allow voice, we call employee voice, to go through all levels and channel up to where decisions are made. So we quite often see voice councils or forums established that are representative of the business. If you're a multi-site operation like Shaw, you'll probably need representatives in each site. But that governance, those mechanisms, they need nurturing. But once they're alive and they're working well, some of the ideas around operational efficiency and improvement really can help drive the business forward. It's really important that it's a two-way engagement. So this is both bottom up and two down, and bottom up and top down. We know that the ownership mindset is actually about our behaviours, and the business has to behave in one way to offer the employee owners an opportunity to respond. But employee owners also have a responsibility to respond as owners. And when those things are working well, that's when we start to see see the gains. And in the care sector specifically, and this is why I'm delighted to hand over to Russell shortly, is actually we are seeing fantastic care delivery. We are seeing improved provision of services. And actually, this is a story that's replicated across Shaw, but also other employee-owned businesses operating in the space. And which is why we're excited about the potential for this to be part of the solution to some of the problems that Richard outlined at the beginning. That's enough for me. You want to hear about someone who's done it, who's living it, who's in the thick of it, and who's doing it exceptionally well. So, Russell, I'm going to hand over to you. If you could share your story and work your way through the slides, that'd be great.
Thank you, James. And crikey, what a billing I've had. Let's hope I live up to it. Well, first of all, let me introduce myself. So, Russell Brown, I'm Chief Executive of Shaw Healthcare. I've been in the care sector. Well, this is my 17th year working in the sector, and I basically joined Shaw back in 2008. I'm into my 4th year as CEO, and prior to that, I was finance director of Shaw when I joined back in 2008. Shaw is a national operator. We have 3,300 employees operating in 63 care locations across the UK. So we're a Welsh company, Welsh headquartered. We're in Wales, we're in Scotland, and we're also in England, as I say, with 63 services. And we probably look after day in, day out, obviously 365 days of the year, about 2,500 residents in our services. So quite a big organisation. But as I'll come on to in a moment, in my view, it's absolutely perfect for employee ownership. So we will get to that, and I'll talk to you about the considerations that we looked at before we became an EOB. And a lot of the things we found on our journey, and indeed some of the things we're doing now to kind of move things forward. I think we have a video, I'm hoping, which I think would be quite a nice scene setter. So if we could play that video, and then I'll pick up, obviously, with my slides.
Established in 1986, Shaw Healthcare is the UK's largest employee-owned care provider, operating 64 care services across 55 locations. In May 2020, an employee-owned trust was established, which initially owned 51% of the company's shares on behalf of its employees. Today, 76% of the company's shares are in the hands of our 3,500 employees. At Shaw, many employees are long-serving. 36% have worked with us for over 5 years and 11% for over 15 years. We celebrate their commitment at special events and anniversaries by presenting certificates and prizes. Loyal employees means a better quality of care for our residents. We set an objective where all of our services should provide care to a minimum standard deemed good or compliant to industry regulators. We've increased from 85.9% to 92% of the target, which we attribute to greater employee engagement. We are proud to have maintained all 4 of our ISO accreditations. In addition, our internal quality of life measure has increased from 80% to 88%. Shaw is proud to have 2 homes in the top 20 award categories for Wales and East Midlands on carehome.co.uk and have an overall score of 9.5. We've also been recognised for excellent care in multiple national awards. A particular highlight in our calendar is our annual Star Awards, where employees nominate each other for exceptional examples of care. Regional events lead to a national ceremony hosted by celebrities and attract sponsorship from national contractors and suppliers. Employee ownership has improved our reputation and helped recruitment. Job vacancies dropped from 198 to 43, and our retention rate has improved from 30% to 15.8%, well below the industry average of 29%. Employee ownership is about a changing culture and improving communications. Our intranet is accessible on laptops and mobiles, so employee owners can access news, carry out work-related tasks, provide feedback or offer suggestions regardless of their role, location or time. Employees understand that having a stake in the company means that if we all perform better, then the more successful Shaw becomes, and that they benefit from that. Shaw has paid over £6.5 million in tax-free bonuses through profit sharing. All employees receive the same bonus, with part-time employees getting a pro-rated amount, and has invested over £15 million in employee salaries beyond the required national living wage changes. Here's what some of our employees have said. It means we're part of a family, and it allows us to offer ideas, be part of the decision process, and also get a bonus. I believe all employees benefit from the success of the company. When decisions are made, it's always with us in mind. We have a share of the company's profits and it's truly inclusive. We're all in it together. There is no them and us, and I feel engaged and motivated, knowing that I can contribute to the company's success. Shaw considers employee ownership as a vital part of its journey of continuous improvement, to create a culture where employees can respect each other, communicate freely, develop, and share a collective sentiment for delivering excellent care to its residents. Success in all of these areas enhances our reputation as a leading care provider, fortifying relationships with existing partners and generating new business, a sustainable business for future generations of employees. Shaw Healthcare, proud to be employee owned.
Okay, so I think that really, well, I hope you found that was a good scene setter. So I just kind of want to drill into some of the points that came through on the video, and also give you some additional comments. So first of all, why did I think employee ownership was right for Shaw? Well, I think James said actually in one of his intro slides, care is very much a people business, and employee ownership is therefore a perfect match. It gives our employees who work day in, day out a vested interest in delivering better care for our residents. It really does sit perfectly alongside that people business. And as most of you, I'm sure, are aware, care is very much about those personal relationships, not just with residents, obviously each other, other colleagues, other members of staff, obviously relatives, and lots of other visiting professionals who come into and out of care settings. So it's perfect, really. EO and care, they're very much a people business, and a perfect match. The other point, which I think was key for us in terms of why it was right for Shaw Healthcare. We had an original founder. As we said in the video, we were established over 40 years ago. And we had a founder, and our founder, it gave him an opportunity to basically sell his shares down to an employee ownership trust. It also enabled us to keep our company independent, which was really, really important. And I know the sector is a combination of many different corporate structures. You have large corporates with private equity investment, you have investment trusts, you have property funds, you have single family owners, and of course you have employee-owned businesses and indeed charities. But for me, I think the employee ownership model very much allows us to preserve our independence, and that's really, really important. And for us, effectively having the business owned by the people who run the business is so important for a business like care. So that was the other key reason why EO was important and right for Shaw. And as I say, it does very much pick up on that legacy point that James mentioned earlier. If you're a founder and you want to exit the business, it is really nice to think that you are leaving your business in the hands of the people that are running it. And I think that's really important. So how did we become an EO? Well, it's over 5 years ago, as we said in the video. And of course, for those of you who recall, that was a dreadful time for the care sector. It was actually right in the middle. We set up the EOT in May 2020. The pandemic had just started. And of course, the journey to actually make the EOT happen didn't just start a couple of months prior to May 2020. It started many months before, and we might talk about that in some of the Q&As. But we continued, notwithstanding the fact that it was a pandemic and a very challenging time for the sector. We continued. We set up our EOT in May 2020, initially with 51% and then 61% of the shares, after the original founder and some other founding shareholders sold their shares into the EOT. So Now, with the EOT and other employee shares and an employee benefit trust, our total employee ownership is 76%. Now, our employee ownership approach is very much to give our employees, and I think this is a great saying, a stake and a say in the business. So the stake obviously comes from that ownership, that indirect ownership through the employee ownership trust. So 61% of the shares are held by the trust on behalf of all our 3,000, it's now 3,300 employees. And the say, which I'll come to in a moment, in my view, equally as important as the stake. The say is obviously having an involvement in the company, being fully engaged in the company that you work for. So let's talk about how employee ownership has evolved. And this, hopefully, if you are thinking about an employee ownership journey and you're running a care organisation, it'll give you a few pointers. So we set up an EOT board, which initially had the founder and myself on it. Neither the founder nor myself are on that EOT board now, but initially we were on it. And we basically have 5 trustees. 2 of those trustees are employee trustees. So you can straight away begin to see that this is a couple of employee representatives having the ability to sit on the EOT trust board and have a say in the business. We have 2 independent trustees and the company's HR director or chief people officer also on that EOT board. And that EOT board meets 4 times a year, and their job is not to run the business. It's to make sure that the management board that I am chief executive of actually run the business in the long-term interests of our employees. So that's the first part of the evolution, if you like, of employee ownership. We now have 63 care, well, I mentioned we have 63 care locations or 63 care services, and each of them have employee representatives. Now, those representatives, it's taken a while to actually get those reps in place for all of the location. And some of that was because we went into we were in the middle of a pandemic and it was quite hard to get this up and running in the early days. But we're now pretty much there with employee reps in all the services. They meet in regional forums and provide 2-way communication. And that's really important, 2-way communication between the EOT Trust Board and the main board, and of course the workforce. So that's, if you like, the second part of the evolution of employee ownership. So those employee reps in each of the services. Culture has been a really important point around employee ownership. And what we have, I mean, we had it in Shaw Healthcare anyway, but we've really pushed it since we've been on our EO drive. We very much have a culture of recognition and celebration of success. So we talked about, in the video, we talked about long service. We've got some amazing service. I've got one support worker in one of our Welsh homes who's actually been with the organisation, and he's been tupied through a number of organisations, but he's actually worked in the care home for over 45 years, which is truly astonishing. So we've got significant numbers of people who've put in long service to the organisation, and that we celebrate. We celebrate that periodically, 5, 10, 15, 20 and so on year anniversaries for those employees. That's a really important point. The Star Awards, we have an annual event where we recognise outstanding achievement, and we run about 8 categories of that across the business, and that's really important. So that's making a fuss and really celebrating some outstanding achievement from our workforce. Open communication I talked about as well, didn't I? In terms of that employee representative and the regional forums. So again, I mean, this was our culture, but it is absolutely kind of embedded now. We have an open communication with our employees. So we share the company's strategic objectives, and we monitor the performance on those objectives, obviously monthly. And our actual performance against those objectives is shared with all of the workforce. So we've got an intranet, and that's open to all the employees. They look day in, day out. They can look at all the stuff they need to in terms of company news. It gives them the ability to take shifts or book holidays or see benefits. But importantly for the company and the employees, it gives them a chance to see how we're performing as a business against our strategic objectives. We also encourage our employees to give feedback, both through the reps and the regional forums, but also if they have any feedback, I'll come in a moment, I'll talk about employee engagement surveys. They give us that feedback through annual surveys. And then we took a decision about 15, 16 months ago now to appoint a dedicated employee voice manager. And she very much supports all of our employee reps and again acts as the link between not just the EOT board and those reps, but also the main board and myself and of course the employees. So she's been really instrumental in driving through a lot of the employee engagement initiatives we have in Shaw. Now, we talked about reward and recognition. So the recognition in the form of those awards, the reward in terms of sharing profits. And for me, this was a really, really important reason for doing the employee ownership model. That is, they work, I'm talking about our employees, incredibly hard. They work long shifts. They're very demanding jobs that they have. They build relationships with residents and families and other professionals. They really, really work amazingly hard. So for me, what employee ownership gives us the ability to do is share the success that our wonderful workforce are actually helping us achieve. We share the success in the form of sharing profits with them periodically. And as James said earlier, you can, and we haven't got anywhere near this, you can, because HM Treasury allow you to, if you're an employee-owned business, you can pay up to £3,600 per annum in the form of a profit share. And we're nowhere near that. Our long-term goal is to get to £1,000 per employee per annum. And last year, 23-24, we got to £450. And really what we've done is we've linked that profit share to obviously the results and the performance of the business. And we've made sure that our employees understand that the harder they work for us in their own care setting, the better their home will do, and the better the group will do, the more money the group will make, and the more profits we have, not just to share in the form of those bonuses and profit share bonuses, also to invest in improved wages, benefits, and investments in the business in the form of investing in buildings and obviously technology. For us, alongside employee ownership, we became a real living wage employer in March 22. That was a really important decision for us as well. So all of this is part of, if you like, our rollout of the employee ownership model in Shaw Healthcare. And actually, if I look at the 5 years and we go back, and we're almost coming up to the anniversary of our 5 years as an EOB, we've done a series of those EOT bonuses, profit shares, and they amount now to £2,300 per employee. And we're just about to pay another one at the end of April in recognition of how well the business did last year. So in the year just gone, and that's a hell of a sort of thank you to the workforce, and that's what it is. It's them working hard and being part of the business and being rewarded for that commitment. The other important point for me, and this isn't always done, I mean you can. So John Lewis, for example, I think. They actually work on a percentage basis of salary. So their bonuses, I think, when they did them, meant that if you were earning more, you'd get a bigger bonus. For us, when we decided to do this, it was really important to say that everyone gets the same bonus. So I get the same bonus as one of my fellow directors, as one of my care home managers, as one of the nurses, the support workers, the cleaner, the cook, etc., etc. And that's been an important message as well. So we are trying to treat everyone exactly the same, because they all have a vested interest in making our business. They're all as important as each other in making our business successful. So moving on, and I don't have lots of slides. I'm just kind of conscious. I want to give you a sort of snapshot of some of the impacts that we've had. And I think it's important to say that employee ownership, and James, I think you said it, and I'm going to say it as well, it isn't the panacea to success. You also said that you have to work really hard at this. And actually, what I'm going to talk about, or most of what I've been talking about, is good business practice anyway. And if you're running your businesses well, you will be doing all these things. You will be engaging with the workforce. You will be treating everyone well. You will be investing in them. You will be investing in environments. All of that stuff is very important. But what the EO model gives you is a great platform to actually bring that to life. And that's what I like about it. It really is that co-ownership principle. You do your bit day in, day out. You help us perform better as a business by delivering better care, and therefore helping us make more money as a business. We can share the benefits of that with you, and we will engage with you much better. I think it's a really important principle. So some of the impacts for us on our journey, and this has been a 5-year journey. So first of all, staff turnover. When we started our journey, it was a difficult time in the pandemic, but our staff turnover at that time, pre-EOT, was in excess of 30%. I think it's about 32 or 33%. Today, we're about 16%, so virtually 50% reduction in staff turnover, not just from being an employee-owned business, by doing all the things that are really important and valuing your employees and telling them what a wonderful job they do and giving them an opportunity to progress and training them and all the rest of it. But actually that there's no coincidence that has happened whilst we've been an employee-owned business. And vacancies, I mean, that statistic that we put up, I think, in the video, about 190 vacancies, that was the figure back in 2020. So today, the vacancies we have, and we're a bigger business than we were in 2020, is less than 50. So we're looking for less than 50 people when it was almost 4 times that 5 years ago. One category of worker that I wanted to mention, because they're very scarce actually, is nurses. So back in 2020, we were looking for 50 nurses. Today, as I speak to you, we're looking for 2. So, it's been a resounding success for us. Boy, oh boy, we're not complacent about that, and we have to make sure we keep working at it. But those are some of the benefits, that have manifested themselves in terms of that reduced staff turnover or increased retention. Improved quality of care. So we have 63 services now, and 92% of those, so 59 of them are actually, 58 of them are actually either good or compliant or above. And that's a pretty good quality record now. Pre-EO, we were in the mid-80s. So again, it's allowed us to improve our quality performance. Now, for those of you in the sector, you will know, whilst we've been having inspections in Wales and Scotland, we haven't had many inspections, certainly in the last couple of years, from CQC. So we would have been much closer to 100% had we had those inspections in England, and we will get there because that's our goal, to get to 100%, either good or compliant. So EO has definitely helped us improve the quality of care for our residents. Now, we've done that, and the staff turnover has very much helped us drive agency reduction. If I go back to 2020, we were spending a mouth-watering amount on agency staff back then, and we still spend a little bit of money on agency staff today, I'm sad to say, but we've seen about a 70% reduction in our agency usage in that period of time. Now, that's done 2 things. One, it's helped us save a bit of money because it's cheaper to employ your own staff than it is to bring in agency staff. But more important than the financial benefits of that agency reduction is the improvements in quality. So it's much better to use your own staff who are familiar with the residents to work with them day in, day out than bringing in agency staff. So that's been a really important driver behind that improvement in quality. That's also led to an improvement in our profitability over that time frame, allowed us to invest in things like the real living wage, which is important clearly for us. It was important to pay. I mean, if I could, and Richard, who represents many care bodies, is trying all the time to try and get a fair payment for us beleaguered care providers. If we could, all of us would pay way more than the real living wage to our workforce because they're worth it. But obviously, we've got to be able to afford it. For us, the real living wage, which is about 50p or so above the national living wage, was a really important decision. So we've invested in that. We've invested in benefits, and we're expanding our own care facilities, so capital expenditure. And we've been acquiring businesses as well. So we did a couple of acquisitions back in the summer last year. So what this journey has allowed us to do is to improve our profitability, and that, of course, brings benefits for employees and the business through that investment and the growth of the business. Engagement. I wanted to come back to engagement with our employees because that's a key part of employee ownership. So we've started measuring our engagement, if you will, employee engagement annually. So we do staff surveys. It's not a complicated process. There are about 20 questions that we ask. Back in 2023, so just as we came out of the pandemic, we did our first annual survey. We had an engagement score of 78%, which isn't bad. It was under our target, but it wasn't a bad score. What was perhaps a little disappointing was back then we had 36% of our workforce responding to the survey. So just over a third of the workforce, about 1,000 or so people. The following year, that went up. So last summer, that went up to 81% as an engagement score. So a big plus, a plus 3%. But even more important was we virtually doubled the response rate. So 71% to more than 2,000 of our 3,000 or so employees told us what they thought of the business. And that was really, really important. This year, we'll be doing our third annual survey. We're targeting 85% as a score. And OK, we've got to go some to beat the 71% response rate from last year, but that's our goal. So we want to try and hear from more of our employees on how we're doing when we're running the business, how we can improve the business, what ideas they have to improve, and what things we can do to make their lives better. And then very quickly, because I'm conscious I haven't got much time for questions, just some reflections very quickly. So we've come a long way in 5 years, and winning the Employee-Owned Business of the Year last year was a lovely endorsement, if you like, our journey so far. But we've still got so much more to do. In many ways, we've just started. And Jane Harrison, who's our employee voice manager, is busy working with those employee reps in our business. And we're trying to step on with our employee ownership ideas in 2025 and beyond. One of the things that we're going to do this year, which is really important to me, is we're going to have an open door meeting with our employees. So we're going to have a half an hour slot a couple of times a year where anyone from the business, subject obviously to having the backup in the service, so we can't drop the ball in the service, they can jump on a call like this and actually ask questions of the senior people in the business. So some of the executive directors, which is, if you like, our next step to improving that kind of engagement with our workforce. Right, that's it. I've gone way over. Apologies, Richard.
Thank you, Russell. No, it's really interesting to hear everything you had to say, and it is such a compelling argument. And you can take the slides down now, sir, Sonam, that'd be great. You've made an incredibly compelling argument for employee ownership. There are benefits across the board in terms of quality, in terms of residents, in terms of staff well-being, welfare. It's a fantastic opportunity for those considering exit and to ensure that their legacy continues. What I would like to do is jump into some questions, because we've got quite a few. So I'm going to ask you very quickly if James and Russell, between you can kind of give us some short answers. We'll send them to you afterwards, and maybe we can give a slightly longer answer and point people to some information afterwards. But diving straight in, what are the key differences, if any, between an EO business and a cooperative?
I can answer that one because I spent 7 years working in the cooperative sector, and there are some brilliant models of care, of cooperative care. But the biggest difference is that an employer-owned business doesn't subscribe to the cooperative values and principles enshrined by the International Cooperative Alliance. Practically, what that means is that employee ownership is probably more of a flexible model. So whereas a cooperative is one member, one vote, an employee-owned business will probably look and feel internally more like a traditional business. It's not fully democratic, and I think that comes to your one of the second questions around, does this slow decision making? No, and as Russell, as you outlined, you've got the board, but you've got a traditional management board running the business, the day-to-day operations, and if anything, we see, and the responses we get from members is that decision making can speed up if you've got authentic employee engagement and input on key strategic decisions. So yes, there are significant differences, and no, it doesn't slow down the decision making process.
Can I just quickly add that point about the EOT board and the main board, your operating board? It's really, really important, and the sharing of information. My philosophy is being open, right? And there will always be some commercial sensitivities, right? But broadly, everyone, not just the EOT board, all the employees know what our corporate objectives are and how we're performing against them. I have no issue sharing that information regularly with everyone, and of course the EOT board. The EOT board are not running the business. It's the traditional operating board that are doing that.
Fantastic. I think you've covered the decision making in terms of the balance between profit distribution over reinvestment. I think that's probably an interesting one for you, Russell.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's no prescribed view on this, right? My sort of rule of thumb, it's just a rule of thumb, right? I mean, I always felt if you made a profit, it would be good to try and distribute maybe 25% of that profit. It would be good to try and invest back into the business in the form of enhanced wages, terms and conditions, and the building and technology and that sort of stuff, maybe 50%, and then keep back 25%. But some people might say it's a third, and a third. There's no real hard and fast, right? My goal of £1,000 profit share bonus per employee per annum, that's a big number, right? And the bottom line is, if the business can't afford it, we won't get there. And when we started, I think we did £200 in our first year for each employee. But we may find if our business doesn't make any profits, we can't share any profits, because we can't share what we don't make. And that link between how well the business does and how much they get is a really important one to make.
Brilliant, thank you. And the next one here is, how do you manage the concept of employees thinking as business owners versus employees who want to kind of get involved in the day-to-day decision making? And what are the implications if someone decides to leave the business?
Right, can I just, I mean, that's a really, really good question, right? And I want to just give you just a snapshot of me walking around one of the services and someone saying to me, can I introduce you to Russell, the owner of the business? To which I said to the person, and there were about 5 or 6 people, employees with me, no, we're all owners of the business, right? So that's the point. Now, the beauty of the EOT, as opposed to direct employee share ownership, which we had in a very small form before we became an EOT, is when someone leaves, the EOT carries on. The EOT holds those shares on behalf of everyone, all current employees. So if you leave the business, it doesn't matter, right? If you had a free share that you were given under a SIP, share incentive plan, then obviously if you're an employee and you become an ex-employee, you still have that direct share holding. But if it's an EOT, it doesn't matter if you leave. The EOT holds the shares on behalf of the current employees.
Fantastic. And James, you touched on this in your part, but how can employees afford to spend large sums of money investing in an organisation. I think you've covered that, but you might want to just kind of clarify that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this is about how does the business pay the exiting founder. So it's the typical model with an EOT is something called a deferred consideration. So what will typically happen is the founder might take a lump sum, an initial agreed lump sum that the business has modeled that it can afford off the balance sheet. So there's an initial payment, and then the founder then receives the balance of their agreed sale price through something called the deferred consideration, which is out of future revenue. So what we see is that those terms are modelled at the point of sale, and so effectively the business is carrying that debt typically from a period of 5 to 7 years. There are businesses that have much longer terms. There are businesses that have much shorter terms. And then once that debt is cleared, the founder has been paid out in full, and the business is able to then utilise, well, if it's spending £1 million a year clearing the debt, for instance, it's suddenly got £1 million a year to allocate across its reinvestment, its profit share, and growth strategy. So there's an initial period where you're paying off that debt. Now, there are lenders in the market that can help you accelerate that process. And there are different ways that people are structuring that debt. And that's one of the beauties of the model. It's incredibly flexible, and anyone thinking about it will need to make sure, in legislation, it says you'll need to make sure you get a fair market valuation, and that is then agreed by both parties. So
for our business, it was 8 years. We did it over 8 years.
And what we quite often see is that period shortens because the business is outperforming its forecasts.
Fantastic. Now, we are coming to the end of time, so I'm going to just wrap up if that's okay. But just something we'll probably follow up with afterwards, and unless you can do it in 2 minutes, James. Really, what would the next steps be for someone who is considering this as an option? And, what sort of data would they need to start putting together to contemplate their capability of moving forward?
So there's 2 things I'd say. One is take a look at the website and at the EOA, because we're able to signpost you to some brilliant legal and accounting experts in the sector. Don't just think that your existing law firm or solicitor might do it. Even if they say they can, make sure they really do and understand it. And then talk to another business. So, talk to a Russell, speak to another business who's been through this process. It doesn't have to be a business in the sector. In fact, there's huge amounts to learn from any employee owner journey. So engage with us as a network. We've got huge amounts of resources, insights, and we can help connect you to people to speak with, both from a technical point of view, but also from a lived experience point of view.
Brilliant. And there are a couple of other little questions that I'll add on to an FAQ, and James will maybe get you just to type some sort of bullet point responses up if that's okay. Just the last one, actually, question that came in: does it have to be an HMRC agreed evaluation?
Yes, so there's a clearance process. So as you sell to an EOT, the valuation is agreed with HMRC.
Fantastic. Well, look, James and Russell, thank you so much for giving us a very quick kind of high-level view of employee ownership. I'll put the white paper in the chat. We'll make sure that we follow up afterwards with a copy of that for everybody. We'll send you a copy of this recording because there's an awful lot said. So it'd be really good for you to take that away and digest that in your own time. We'll hopefully get an FAQ out to you before the end of the week and a copy of the slides. Just a huge thank you, Russell and James, for your involvement and your support through getting that paper produced. James, from your team, it's been phenomenal. I'm sure we'll come back and do more of these. I'm sure there's more to say, Russell, that we could talk about this for probably many more hours on its own. If anyone's got any questions, we will make sure that you are connected with Employee Ownership Association afterwards to answer any of those, but we'll get some more information out to you. Just a huge thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.